Hey, happy Thursday. Welcome back to Go Fund Yourself. JD Gagnon here, my good friend Kiara. What's going on?
Hi, it is Thursday. It's before a long weekend in Canada. I wonder if it's a long weekend anywhere else.
I have absolutely no idea.
Are you wearing anything cool?
Spectral.
Oh, Spectral. Oh.
Spectral's, I like the back of it. It's kind of worth showing.
Oh yeah, that's pretty sick.
Yeah, it's kind of cool.
You're just
right?
trying to show off that you've been like working your lats. That's
yeah. I actually stuffed the shirt. There's prosthetics.
You're gonna start like cutting the sleeves out.
yeah. That's probably the next step. I'll start wearing like wife beaters on the stream. I think that's gonna be the thing. Anyways, okay. So it is Thursday. It's BTC Miami this week, so lots going on.
Woo.
I've been all over the map.
Heck yeah.
But exciting. Lots of really interesting people that I haven't seen for a long time in town, which is really cool.
Fun.
Ran into some people that like were our initial investors in Benki like years ago, which is really cool. I haven't seen them for a long time. So anyways, It was awesome. Okay, but we got lots of stuff to talk about today. So what are we talking about? Where do we start?
Okay, we're just going to talk about Australia. I refuse to talk about anything but Australia today. Maybe because it's almost Victoria Day for us in the monarchy. Maybe Australia has a holiday on Monday. Anyway,
is it going to be a Charles Day now?
Oh, well, it's not. It wasn't an Elizabeth Day.
Oh yeah, right.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe he'll do that. I don't know anything about.
He should commandeer the days globally. I think, but that's his royal right. I don't know. All right, so we're talking
all right. We're going to talk about Australia a lot. So their oldest bank has decided to ban cryptocurrency transactions, which is like a little bit shmee, but it matters because they have been working on their CBDC, and May 31st marks the end of their pilot program. So they have actually been making transactions. We're going to talk about that a little bit. We're also going to talk about Binance, and we're going to talk about Australia Bitcoin ATMs, which is crypto ATMs. Australia has a wacky number of them for reasons unknown. So although the Bitcoin ATM news is a little bit old, I think it's from about a month and a half ago. Everything else is from yesterday, but Bitcoin ATMs give us a little bit of context. Am I missing anything from the land down under? Actually, I have to say, you know what the news from Australia usually is? Like I looked up just Australia news today.
CBDC. Oh,
it's not.
Generally.
Just generally. Their news is like Florida. Their news is super wacky. I mean, they have news that you're going to expect, like, you know, there was a car crash or there's snow or that kind of thing. And then the rest of their news is like, man lost toe while surfing. And you're like, what?
It's kind of like the Florida man things. Florida man gets both feet bitten off by an alligator, but somehow wins. Or I don't know. There's always some crazy shit. All right, let's bloody go.
Let's do it.
All right, welcome back. We are just trying to get our Twitter space
rolling
up and going. We go.
Like I'm usually a decent multitasker, but there's got to be an easier way. If you know an easier way, you come tell me.
Someone please let us know. Yeah.
Oh God.
I mean, okay, we are now
we got it. There we go.
We are on Twitter Space and everything, so we can get going. Yeah, if there's an easier way to broadcast to Twitter Space while also doing live video to other platforms, someone please let us know. Because currently we're using phones sitting on our desks, duplicating the audio.
I'm sure the sound is impeccable.
I mean, it's actually not that bad, all things considered. It's not the same as our, recording mics, but it's definitely not crappy. So that's good. Anyways, okay, so we're going to start with the land down under.
Westpac.
Westpac. All right. Tee it up.
All right. So Australia's oldest bank decided that they don't want to have cryptocurrency transactions. There is an echo today, I think.
I don't get it. It's only on your end.
Okay. So they've decided that they don't want to have cryptocurrency transactions because, I don't know, they think that it's scammy, and this kind of bleeds into the Binance news that we're going to talk about afterwards. But essentially, they want to reduce scam losses. They want to pigeonhole people into their own currency. And they have removed the ability to move your crypto into fiat.
Yeah. So this is interesting because Australia has been, we've been somewhat pleasantly surprised by Australia's willingness to start engaging crypto and trying to make a inviting environment for crypto projects and so on. And they had done a lot with respect to DAOs and DAOs legal standing and so on, months ago in 2022, which is really exciting. But now we're seeing kind of the same thing here that, as we've seen in North America, as we've seen in Europe, a lot of the banks are, so again, I have a tin hat on when it comes to this, but I think that a lot of the banks are feeling the pressure. They're like, holy crap, this is going to eat a big piece of our business if we don't find a way to get involved. And they were sleeping on it for too long. So now the easiest way is to try to slow down the evolution of the space so that financial institutions can figure out a way to participate. And we're seeing that in America too. Like Onyx is the platform that JP Morgan and Goldman are working on with Microsoft. So on one hand, we're seeing a lot of like high-powered lobby against the crypto industry and so on in Congress. And then at the same time, we're seeing that same group that's paying for the lobby against crypto is meaningfully investing in trying to find a way to participate. And so I think there's a little bit of like kind of business gamesmanship going on here. I don't know anything about Westpac directly, but as you can imagine, it's causing a lot of friction now in the space, which kind of brings us into the next.
Hold on, wait. I have more to say.
Okay.
For once in my life, hold on. So I looked up a little bit about just the Australian monetary system because admittedly, I am not an Australia expert. I've never been there. I don't know anything about Australia. I just started looking at a map of Australia last month. Like I have no idea. And what I didn't realize is that they didn't officially move from the British pound to the Australian pound until 1966.
AUD.
And so
dollar.
It says Australian pound. I don't know. That's why I thought it was weird. But anyways, it is AUD. But they moved from the British currency to their own currency. They started in the early 1900s, but they didn't finish until 1966. And why I think that's interesting is that their banks haven't necessarily been operating as independents for a full 100 years yet.
Right.
So I wonder, and again, I have no idea because I am not Australian and I don't know that much about Australia, but I wonder if their banks are as mature in their investments and assets as some of the other countries that we see introducing CBDCs, because if not, that could make it easier for them to innovate or harder because they aren't as sound, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of financial resources in Australia. It's a very expensive place to live, and it's a fairly affluent country, all things considered, which is kind of funny considering it was where they sent all the criminals a few hundred years ago.
Yeah, they've done well for themselves.
Yeah, they've done pretty good, and they've kind of carved out a pretty interesting ecosystem and pretty interesting lifestyle and culture and so on. But anyways, contrary to what everybody expected, it's not just a lawless country. It's actually quite the opposite. It's beautiful. I spent a good amount of time there post-college. I'd like to say gaining life experience, but mainly drinking and surfing and stuff like that. But anyways, so I really don't know, to be honest, like kind of where this is coming from. I tend to lean, my bias is they're scared of, CBDC plus regulated on-chain finance completely changes the game for incumbents. In theory, it'll take time. It's not going to happen in a year, but it could, over the course of a decade or two, really eat into their revenues. And so, just from purely business strategy perspective, if I was them, what I would be thinking is, let's pull on whatever levers we can to slow this train down, so we can make sure we build a car to get on the train. And I think it's unfortunate because we've all been building, saying this is the future for the last 5, 6 years, 7 years, some people longer, and only now are these guys starting to fight against it. So it's a little frustrating, but at the same time, I think this is also part of the industry maturing. Is when you see, kind of this like power struggle between what was and what will be, and everybody's trying to carve out kind of where their future is. We saw the same thing with the internet in the late 90s, early 2000s. Yeah. I'm serious, right? Like, it was
complete chaos. And then all of a sudden, all the old school tech companies are like, wait a second, we gotta figure out how to slow this the fuck down so we can participate. And that's kind of what happened. And so all of that to say, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's frustrating. It's frustrating for people that are having their on and off ramps, which we're going to move on to in a second, I think. But have their on and off ramps potentially shut down. Like there are other avenues. I mean, there's other ways to do it. There is regulated on and off ramps in Australia other than Binance.
I was going to say, actually, Australia did some pre-work on regulation in 2017, 2018. So they already have crypto included in its anti-terrorism and anti-money laundering acts, which is kind of cool because I think we're just seeing that happening in America now with KYC.
not even yet.
So in some ways, it's almost like they're behind, and in some ways, it's like they were forward thinking. But this next one's interesting because we're going to talk about the CBDC in Australia. And as you can imagine, Australians are not exactly government-loving, super trusting
which is interesting because generally it's fairly big government in Australia. It's a fairly
they like to follow
left-leaning country. Yeah,
right. They're pretty organized, and I don't want to say militant, but in Canada we see whatever we can get away with, right? Same with in America, we're like, let me be free. Whereas in Australia, they're like, if we all adhere to the rules, we'll have nice
everybody be happy.
Yeah. It's really interesting. That doesn't mean that they adhere to the rules well, but at least they try. But what's interesting about it is that the Australian government in about 2020, there were a few news articles I found where the Australian government was like anti-CBDC. They were like, we're not going to do it. You don't have to worry about it. And then they changed their minds. And so we're seeing them reach the end of their pilot project now.
Right.
So the pilot project ends May 31st. And to ensure that they complete their pilot project to the best of their abilities, they have started actual transactions with the EAUD. So they have actually traded EAUD against USDC on ETH. In some ways, this sounds exciting. And in other ways, because we do this all day, it sounds really fucking boring.
It's kind of like, yay! Really? Like we're amazed that you made a transaction, but I think at the same time, it's probably worth acknowledging that this is not necessarily a small feat. In order to facilitate an on-chain transaction on a layer 2, you had to meaningfully bootstrap liquidity. You had to find an exchange partner that was willing to accept the asset. You had to go through a certain amount of risk. You had to go through a certain amount of custody considerations on how do you lock up the AUD to issue the EAUD, which is a lot easier when you're the government because you don't need to wait for eternities for approvals. But this still is a fairly significant milestone, I think. We're seeing a major economic country, meaningfully substantial economic country, probably not major powerhouse, but meaningful economic country, Western country, start meaningfully moving towards this and taking, some fairly substantial steps. So to you and
do we mean Western by they're pretty southern?
Yeah, I know. But Western,
I'm just teasing.
Western doesn't actually mean, come on. Western doesn't actually mean West.
I know, I'm teasing. I'm sorry.
But anyways, I think it's definitely a good thing in a sense. Again, I'm not a big fan of CBDCs at all, to be honest. And I think this one is even more likely to go down the slippery slope, in my opinion. We saw what happened in Australia with COVID. A lot of people that lived there loved it because they felt their country was protecting them. From the outside looking in, it seemed militantly crazy, but people just accepted it. And so I think because they've got that precedent now, I just don't see them, being reluctant to continue pushing this. But we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Okay, so one thing that I do actually really like about this news that I have to say is that Australia has straight up come out and said that it is an ETH layer 2 blockchain. A lot of the CBDCs that we read about are talking about distributed ledgers so that they don't have to deal with the term blockchain. Right. And I love that Australia is like, hey, everyone, this is actually on the blockchain. It's on ETH. And I think part of why they are able to do that has to do with our next article, which is there's quite a lot of positive crypto sentiment in Australia. So Australia has the most crypto ATMs in the world right now. Last year in 2022, 412 crypto ATMs were removed from the world. I'm sure there's more than that, but that was like a quick stat that I could find. And meanwhile, Australia installed over 360.
Incredible.
That's wacky.
I mean, the Bitcoin ATMs have not been without problems. There's been weird hacks and like weird shit that's happened to them, which is like any other platform. But Australia, for sure, has been pretty on board with that. I think, I think I'm happy about this again because it's a country far away from us, where it's a bit of a petri dish, and we can see kind of what happens and what goes right and what goes wrong. I mean, it's important to note that the naming of ETH-L2 versus distributed ledger, it's just semantics. I mean, they're synonymous.
Oh, absolutely. But the average human might not know that, right?
Well, exactly. Yeah, it's perception, right? And
so like my mom doesn't know that distributed ledger technology means blockchain. So if she sees that the government of Canada brings in a CBDC on blockchain, she's going to be up in arms. But if it's a distributed ledger technology, well, that sounds really good.
That sounds academic. That's exciting. let's do that. Yeah, all of that is great. I think the ATM thing like kind of gets me a little bit. Like, there's way easier ways than going to a convenience store and messing around with these ATMs. Like maybe 10 years ago, before like DEXs existed and on-ramps were fairly plentiful, like there's a lot of on-ramps to get money in. Getting money out is not quite as easy, but you get hosed on fees on those ATMs. So like,
I actually tried to use one the other day. So I live in Edmonton, Alberta, and the first place in Edmonton to get Bitcoin ATMs was Remedy Cafe. And they work, I don't know if it's co-owned or what the deal is, but they work with a company in Edmonton called Bitcoin Well that is admittedly doing very well for themselves. They were the first like ATMs and crypto ATMs in the prairies. And whatever, I was at Remedy and I'm like, fuck it, I should try one of these Bitcoin ATMs and see what it works like, because I've never tried one, right? Like, how scammy is it? How useful is it? What happens? Anyways, you go up to it and there's all of these like anti-money laundering, anti-crypto, RCMP police notices, City of Edmonton police notices, be careful, don't send money anywhere. And I don't know, I thought it was pretty interesting that you have to already have bought into the ATM if like this isn't a new point of entry, because if you approach it that way, there's all of this like anti-signage. Anyways, I went to use it and the network was down. So I went to use like 4 or 5 other ones over the course of a week because now I'm curious, right? And all of them are like, can't connect to network. But it's connected to the internet. It just can't connect to the network that I'm interested in trading on. So the ones that we have here are almost exclusively for Bitcoin. So it looks like they're testing to see if people want to use other networks or that kind of thing, but then giving us the error message. And I thought that was interesting too. Like, I wonder if the crypto ATMs in Australia, if they're more usable. And if we have all of these crypto ATMs, does that mean that we have a wild crypto industry in Australia that we're kind of like not reporting on and not talking about?
I mean, there's a lot of really interesting projects coming out of Australia, like quite a few actually, like fairly big name projects. And one in particular that was started out of Australia is Maple Finance, which is we've talked about a couple of times. But I mean, and part of the reason that a lot of these fairly sophisticated projects are coming out, financial projects are coming out of Australia, is because there's a meaningful path for people to leave traditional finance and comfortably enter the blockchain space, because they kind of, there are some rules that you know where the boundaries are, generally speaking, in Australia. So I mean, that's a testament. I think there's a lot more, not more, but there's a lot of very interesting development coming out of there, mainly because they've been at least clear, relatively speaking, about what you can and can't do in Australia. So I mean, again, as much as I kick and scream about even Canada, where everything's a security, at least we know everything's a security, and like, I don't love it, but at least the rules are clear now. And so if you want to play in Canada, then you can participate according to the securities legislation in Canada. And Binance, which we're going to talk about in a second, but Binance pulled out of Canada for that reason. And now, because of some regulatory challenges in Australia, Binance I believe they had their futures.
They're derivatives.
Derivatives.
So this is actually interesting because all crypto news says Binance regulatory challenges, and all Australian actual news, like normie news,
Yeah.
says Binance broke the law. And in this particular case, Binance misreported retail users as wholesale users to allow them to do different things they wouldn't otherwise be able to do on the derivatives exchange. So spot trading is still active in Binance in Australia. Pretty well everything else you can do, but they have just halted that one element, I think about 6 weeks ago, a month ago. And then last night they started having an additional issue. So you can no longer have PID Australian dollar deposits.
Which is probably a big chunk of people in Australia are comfortable using Binance. Their payment infrastructure is pretty good in the absence of other major centralized exchanges. Here's what I want to say about this one. I don't know what Binance's macro strategy is, because while everybody else is trying to figure out globally how to participate, whenever there's regulation that comes in, Binance just pulls out. And so MiCA was just passed a couple of days ago. So what are they going to do? Avoid all of Europe? Like, plus avoid the US, plus avoid Canada, plus avoid Australia? Like, I'm just not sure what the approach is there, or if they're just waiting for like absolute clarity until there's some like maybe harmonious structure globally that we can all be like, okay, if you do this one thing properly, it works everywhere. But I
was wondering this too, like, are they going to take their Wild West money and invest in the next emerging technology? Like,
I don't know. Hey, we would give you a cookie if, in a week from now, Binance comes out saying that they're pivoting to AI.
I'm not saying that they would. I'm just saying, like, where is the play, right?
I really don't know. Like, this to me is a little bit puzzling, to be honest. Why? Like, I get it. I understand why they're pulling out. They're pulling out maybe for influence, maybe to pressure changes in regulation, but I'm not sure that the government cares. Like,
yeah,
honestly,
exactly that.
like I'm not sure that anybody cares that Binance can't participate government-wise, policy-wise, in Canada or Australia. Like, they're probably like, okay, cool. If you're not going to follow the rules, beat it.
That's fine.
Now, I wouldn't put it past CZ and crew to have some master plan here. The problem is that we're seeing more and more implications of Binance doing things maybe a little less than above board. I mean, they just received a lawsuit from the CFTC, I believe, a couple months ago, wasn't it? And so, like, it'll be interesting to see how they respond to this. I mean, I wouldn't be discounting Binance at the moment. I'm sure they're going to find a way, or maybe their plan is to just wait until there's enough big exchanges and then just start buying them all. I don't know.
That's true. Someone else does the regulatory work and then they buy in.
And they just buy it, yeah. And then, I mean, there's probably a whole bunch of antitrust laws in all these countries that may prevent that. I don't know. But that tells me maybe we should just start building regulated exchanges and sell them all to Binance.
Why not?
If anybody uses my business idea, in the footnotes in the footnotes of your memoir, mention "Go Fud Yourself."
Okay, so we talked about Westpac, the bank.
Yeah.
How they're not allowing fiat crypto exchanges anymore. We talked about Binance and how they're not allowed to have fiat crypto exchanges. You can't on spot exchange. You can't derivative, but Binance is under the wire. We talked about the CBDC in Australia, and we talked about Bitcoin ATMs. So with all of this information, do you have a new opinion about Australia and crypto? Their sentiment is way higher than I expected. So
yeah, I mean, I've always had kind of a neutral opinion of Australia. I like that they're trying to push this stuff forward, because I think it's a fairly well-respected democracy and regulatory environment that when they make some regulatory movements, it's an example that other meaningfully developed countries will at least consider as a comparative case. Whereas when you see like a lot of these small countries like Estonia and Macedonia and like, I don't know, Tanzania, like all these little kind of obscure to the rest of the world, I guess, making regulations, people are like, okay, like no one really cares. No one really cares what South Korea does or what Malaysia does or the Philippines does, because there's a lot of those countries are at least perceived from our perspective as being somewhat corrupt and having their own incentives. But Australia, I think, is a good example. So I'm positive in that sense that they're doing something, and they're doing it on their own with a lot of public engagement, which I think is actually increasing sentiment in the country. So if there's anything to take out of this, it's if the government is open to it and meaningfully engages the people, everybody wins. Industry wins, government wins, society wins. That's not what we're doing here. That's not what many other countries are doing. So for that reason, I do admire what's happening in Australia. What I don't love is, I think, again, drum that I'm constantly banging on, it's a slippery slope. And I think Australia, as much or more so than many other countries, is inclined to go down that slope quickly. So we'll see.
Before we go, I just want to say one other thing about Crypto Australia, just some facts and figures that I found from Bankless. So between 2020 and 2021, cryptocurrency adoption jumped 56%, which means that at the end of 2021, nearly 30% of Australians have owned or currently own cryptocurrency. And then the top 5 tokens that are owned as of 2021, so maybe not as relevant now, 72% is Bitcoin, 43% is Ethereum, 29% is Dogecoin, 13.9% of Australians who own cryptocurrency own Ripple.
29% have Dogecoin in Australia? What the actual
29% of the 30% who own crypto.
Yeah.
So 1/3 of the third. And then 13% of them own Solana. Now, what's interesting about this to me is Ripple, because if Australia chooses to work with Ripple to introduce the CBDC, they might already have a third of the country on board with Ripple, which is kind of cool. And we talked about Ripple quite a bit yesterday. And just as I had anticipated, because Ripple was in the news yesterday, we're going to see a bunch of almost fake news about Ripple all week. So there were quite a few articles today about how Ripple is introducing some new platform for CBDCs. That has been on their site for months. This is not like a new thing. They're already helping.
I think their acquisition from earlier this week is what's facilitating that announcement now. They actually have the infrastructure to come out and announce it, right?
I suppose, but they were already offering the CBDC to Estonia and somewhere else, weren't they? Yeah.
Probably.
Like, I don't know. There's just...
Again, Estonia, like...
I know. But Ripple has a really good case here. So if they have a 13%, or let's say that it's probably more now, let's say they have a 20% adoption rate in a country that's looking at a CBDC, and then they start offering services to that government, that is a fantastic onboard. Like, it's a good sale.
Yeah.
All right. That's all I wanted to say.
I mean, go Ripple. I don't have a horse in that race. I don't own any Ripple.
No, either. I just thought it was a smart thing to do.
But I've got a lot of love for Ripple executive, and just they're fighting the good fight on behalf of the space, I think. And so for that reason, I want them to win bigly. I want them to win huge. Because the easy thing to do, honestly, would be to tuck tail and run. Totally. That would have been the simplest solution. Turn around, launch a new L1, call it a day, be done with it. But they didn't do that. And that's respectable. We see a lot of people, when times get tough, fold. And it's different when you have resources like Ripple did. Fine. But I mean, they did something to get there, and now they're willing to push through it. And so anyways, I hope they win. All right.
Great. Thank you to Dr. Tammy for tuning in today.
Yeah, Dr. Tammy, what?
We're here every day at the same time, and we have a variety of themes about CBDCs and rural economies.
And all things blockchain and crypto news. The idea here, again, as always, is to help dispel some hyperbole, which leads to greater FUD, to get rid of some of the FOMO, which leads to poor decision making.
How many acronyms can you use in this explanation?
FUD, FOMO, FUD and FOMO. They're just F acronyms. And so we're here every day, 12:30 Eastern, Monday to Friday, same place. And that place is all over the freaking place. Twitter Spaces. We do live videos to Twitter, live to LinkedIn, live to YouTube, live to Twitch most of the time, live to Facebook.
Can't miss us.
You can't miss us. So help us spread the word, though, Dr. Tammy, and everybody else that's listening on the other venues. Like, subscribe, share, hit the bell, hit all that shit, do whatever. And if you're on Twitter and if you're watching the replay, please bookmark the episode. It doesn't do anything negative for you, but it really adds to our exposure and reach in the algo. With that, have a wonderful day. Kiara, go find yourself.
Go find yourself.